So, Richard, what inspired you to write your first crime novel?
Well, one of the few shows that my wife and I both like watching is Hallmark murder mysteries. But I always end up yelling at the TV saying, that's hearsay, that's a leading question, that's unprofessional. And so my wife said, well, can you do any better? And it was almost like a dare. And so I started writing this. And because it was in that context, the heroine needed to be a young woman. I feel so self-conscious about writing from that perspective. But once I was into the dare, I was committed. Desi Summers, the heroine, is about the same age as my daughter, so that helps a bit. Sometimes I say, what would you do in this situation? What would you say in this situation?
Well, thank you. And that's going to be fascinating to so many people, just what you're watching anyway, Richard. Thank you. And do you think now the stories that you're writing are more accurately describing what happens in the legal world?
In the professional regulation world, I try to be fairly close to what the law says. So I think it is in that respect, and sometimes even get a bit preachy. But in the criminal investigation world and the criminal hearing world, not so much. No police detective would ever allow a witness to have that kind of involvement in an investigation. So, I take liberties to make the story work. So on that level, it's only a partial success.
Richard, do we need to ask, what did your wife think of the stories?
Well, she's still trying to finish the first novel. So on that level, it's an absolute failure. But I take some consolation in the fact that she also can't finish watching TV shows either. So,
Now, Richard, she's not falling asleep in the middle of the book, is she?
oh yeah, just like she does in the shows.
There you go. Okay, so why did you decide to self-publish these, Richard?
Well, even with that, I did get some great feedback from my family when I shared sort of a beta version of the novel. Other family members were really raving about it, and they encouraged me to publish it. One of my cousins reads a lot of crime mysteries, and he was only reading mine out of a sense of obligation, but his response was, it's actually good. You can't have higher praise than that, I guess. So I decided to take the plunge, hoping that some of my colleagues in the professional regulation world might find it interesting to read fiction in that perspective.
Thank you. And there's not much fiction in regulatory world for sure, certainly including mystery and comedy too. So thank you for that, Richard. So how did you come up with that name, Desi Summers?
Well, that's part of our family history lore. When I was young, I read Othello, and I was intrigued with that Desdemona character. I now realize that she's pretty one-dimensional, but I was young when I read it. So I told my wife early on that if we ever had a daughter, I'd like to name her that. And she wasn't too thrilled with that idea. So she conspired with my sisters and my mom. My mom had a farm cat with no name, so they called her Desdemona. And then they said, it's inappropriate for you to call a daughter Desdemona the same name as a cat. So naming the character Desdemona fulfills a lifelong dream for me.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So this character, who is she patterned after?
No one, not even my daughters. None of the characters are based on real people I know. I just came up with a personality that seemed to fit and then went with it. And once created, these people, these personalities are like almost out of my hands. So for example, Desi is more impulsive than I would like, and she has a temper that makes me ask, where did that come from? And she's a tomboy, and she's also quite perceptive and caring. And then Detective Carlos is so staid and by the book and formal, but he also has a soft, sensitive side. He's oblivious to sports, and that's kind of endearing. And His appreciation of Jane Austen and gardening is kind of surprising. And then there's Constable Joyce Stinson, who teases her boss, Carlos, mercilessly and otherwise crosses the interpersonal line regularly, but she gets away with it because she's brilliant. And then these characters, they kind of change each other. Carlos in particular becomes less rules obsessed over time, and Desi becomes a bit more conscious of her personal safety. Maybe not Joyce. She does some surprising things in the third book, so she's not changing a lot. I'm not sure people are going to believe that, and maybe I'm fooling myself, but that's my perception. They just take on a life of their own.
So we're not going to see you in the books anywhere, Richard?
No, I'm not some hidden hero in the book. If I had to choose someone with whom I share some characteristics, it might be Peter Dunkworth in my first book. He's the senior partner of a law firm that Desi works at. And he's kind of, well-intentioned, but somewhat oblivious. And I'm told I'm share some of those characteristics.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I need to ask about your writing process. How does that work for you, Richard?
That's really hard to describe. Those who know me will be surprised to learn that I don't actually plan the story in detail in advance. I have this overall concept that I get mostly in the middle of the night, sort of elevator talk, 25 words or less, and then I just work with that framework. And so then I get periods of time where I'm just going like gangbusters, and I write, in bursts, and then there's take some time off. And when I'm in the writing mode, I'm just consumed with it. I'm living in an alternative universe. I think, what would this character do in that situation? What would they say? How would the other person in the room respond to that? What fits with their personality? It just kind of writes itself.
The style of your writing is very different than anything I've seen or read. So why did you use that, the dialogue?
Well, the external and internal dialogue kind of fits my process. I'm not telling a story when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I'm experiencing the situation in my imagination. And so I'm writing it as it goes through the main character's mind. And it's more immediate than if you're describing events through a narrator. And it also requires the reader to interpret the words and thoughts of Desi. For example, is this main character deluding herself? Is she making a mistake that she's going to regret? Is she sabotaging her relationship with Carlos with what she just said or did? That's a pretty obscure reference to Jane Austen. So I think the audience hopefully is engaged with that.
That's fantastic. And what's the response been so far?
Uh, so the response has been an incredible experience for me. People have been reaching out to me. A former client who I haven't talked with in 20 years reached out to me and said that they liked it, and we had a chance to catch up and what had been happening to us and talk about grandkids and stuff. A more recent client sent me a picture of her son reading the book, and he said that he thought it was a true story, and he got some sort of insights into his mother's job, maybe a skewed insight, but maybe some insights into his mom's job. Most of the feedback I get is, that was a fun read, followed by fast paced, and that's followed by, I worked with you for years. I never saw that side of you.
That's exactly right. And I think I also gave you some feedback from a colleague who said that their heart was pounding as they turned the page. And you're creating that in people. So enjoy that, Richard. That's great part of being a writer. Alrighty, Richard, how many of these novels do you intend to write?
Well, I'm finishing my third one, and I think I'll take a pause there, see if I can live without writing anymore. Each of the books is getting a bit more serious. The third one touches on themes about burnout and the cost of professional regulation, both on those involved in regulation and on those caught up in investigations and discipline. Working professional regulation is dangerous. I mean, murders are rare, but threats and harassment are all too common. And the complaints and discipline process exacts a toll on all participants. Regulators disrupt lives, usually in a necessary way, but painful nonetheless. So I want to stop before it gets too depressing, but we'll see. Writing fiction is addictive.
That's it. And some bonus questions, Richard. So, since you said that, do you think you can come back to comedy after getting dark and on the darker side?
Well, I'm there's still a lot of comedy in the third book, so it's dry. It's dry comedy. It's not something you're probably going to laugh out loud at very often, but yeah, that's certainly always going to be part of the writing.
Excellent. And how long do we have to wait for this third book to come out?
Well, it's just about done. I think I'll be finishing off the manuscript soon, and then it's going to be copy edited, and then it's going to be posted through your skilled hands.
Well, thank you for that. And we're looking forward to it, Richard. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to book number 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.